Dr. Howard Wall directs the Hammond Institute and the Center for Economics and the Environment here at Lindenwood University, where he is also chair of the economics department. In this talk titled The More the Merrier, he looks at cities like St. Louis, in which many municipal governments compete for residents. While from a certain viewpoint this may seem inefficient, Dr. Wall argues that it creates better outcomes for residents.
Okay, now also, and anyone, I see a couple of my current and former students here, so you'll be shocked to hear that my talk today is going to be very, very pro-government. Does that shock you? Now, normally I don't have very good things to say about government. Today, my talk is going to be very pro-government, but not that we should have a lot of government, it's that we should have lots of governments. All right, so many governments rather than a lot of government. So see what I did there? Pro-government there. Okay, so I take as a starting point the St. Louis metro area, because there's a constant debate going on here about the appropriate scope of government and how many governments we should have. So just to highlight what's going on here, so the St. Louis metro area has 2.7, 2.8 million people over 17 counties in 2 states. And we are the third most governed large metro area in the United States, meaning that we have the third highest ratio of governments per capita or something. So we have 1,027 different government entities. Those are separate government entities over those 17 counties. And as I said, we have and that's crossing 2 different states. We have 274 cities. Okay, and each of those cities has some sort of a mayor or some sort of a government. 156 school districts. And then in Illinois, there are all sorts of townships that are in addition to that that are much smaller. And you add in fire districts and other things like that, and you get over 1,000, and you're not even counting all of the private sort of quasi-governments like subdivisions, which are huge in Missouri, where your subdivision of the neighborhood you live in has actually quite a lot of decision-making and acts like a mini government, but it's a private entity. And then on top of that, the different governments that you have at different levels will cooperate on an ad hoc basis. So we have the Bi-State Development Agency, which is a collection of some of those governments together that make decisions about transportation and whether or not to build another light rail through the cornfields to the airport with no flights. They were in favor, by the way. And also we have things like the Museum District, where 3 of the counties, well, the city of St. Louis, the county of St. Louis, and I think St. Charles County is involved in that, where tax money is raised to finance the zoo and the museums that are in the city of St. Louis. So lots and lots of different entities, and they cooperate in a variety of different ways. Now, there's often also a lot of talk that this is terrible for St. Louis, because what we need is a broader regional view of the area so that we can make our decisions better, make better decisions, actually, is what they say, because this is holding us back. And the people who are usually complaining about this are government leaders themselves, because they find themselves hamstrung in their efforts sometimes, because they find that if they enact some policies, then they'll end up losing businesses or residents to neighboring places. And this is just unfair to have to compete like this, because these, after all, are great policies. So, these people will just leave. So let's enact these policies for everyone. So governments complain, and often a lot of business leaders complain about the fragmentary nature of governance in St. Louis, because it prevents them from milking more money out of the government, because each of the small local governments doesn't have a lot of money, but if you pool it all together, they've got a lot. So they find it very difficult. They don't know they have to deal with several different people, or many different people, just to decide where to locate and things like this. So some portions of the political leaders and business leaders in the area complain that we really need a more centralized and defragmented system in St. Louis so that we can move forward and make decisions for the greater good of everyone. And my response to that, which actually I'm asked about this frequently by reporters at the Post-Dispatch, and I've never made the paper, these quotes have never made the paper, is that my response is that what we need is more fragmentation. And what's good we do have is because we are so fragmented. If we weren't so fragmented, we'd be really, really in the crapper. If you think things are bad now, if you think the education is bad now, imagine if you had one giant school district. Or imagine if economic policy was determined by, say, if for the county of St. Louis was now combined with the city of St. Louis, or if St. Charles County was being governed by St. Louis County. I see there's been some sniping in the paper lately about this. The river is some sort of a barrier where someone from St. Louis County was complaining that everyone in St. Charles has guns, and someone in St. Charles says, well, we have jobs and you don't, and stuff like this. So it goes back and forth. But that's actually the beauty of it. Maybe you say, well, you shouldn't have all this sniping. It's no, you should have all this sniping. After all, you don't like each other. So don't hold it in. Now, and if you think about this, I say, okay, if you had more fragmentation, you'd be better off. You think of the place that is in the worst shape in the entire area, and one of the worst places in the entire country is the city of St. Louis. This is it's definitely the worst, well, sorry, Kansas City's now taken over it, the worst school district in the state of Missouri, and certainly one of the worst school districts in the entire Midwest. Kansas City is probably worse now because they're only now being taken over by the state to try to build it from scratch. But those are by far the two largest and consolidated school districts. So what they have is that none of the schools are any good. Right? So the city of St. Louis, 300 and some thousand people, and one giant school district, and none of the schools are any good. Okay, St. Louis County now it's under a million, just under 1 million people with, I don't know how many school districts, maybe 80 school districts in the county. 40 of them are good, 40 of them are bad. And some of them are really bad, and some of them are really, really good. Well, so that means at least half the kids in St. Louis County are getting a good education, right? The ratio in St. Louis is 0. Okay, so you might have more equity in the city of St. Louis, but it's equity at the bottom end. So what good education we have is because of the fragmented nature of the school districts. And that's even forgetting the fact that maybe we shouldn't even have school districts, but that's another discussion. But it's that at least people have a choice. They have an option to go to where there might be good schools if they can. And if they don't want good schools, then they don't have to go and get them. They don't have to pay for them. So we see that all the time. People make all of their decisions basically when they're moving. Anyone who has kids, a lot of people make their decisions solely on schools. Right? So if you didn't have a choice of where to live, then didn't have a choice of school districts, it was all one big bad school district, then you couldn't choose to go where schools were better and make your kids have your kids get a better education. Okay, so part of this flies in the face of what has become kind of gospel among at least the public discussion, is but someone will be left behind. Right? And in education, it's, not everyone will get a good education. You're only benefiting some people. And it's, at least you're benefiting someone, is my answer to that. And as another friend of mine said, when the No Child Left Behind policy, or the laws were passed in the early 2000s, he said, that's just wrong. It's really, the optimal policy is some children should be left behind. Which sounds crass, but you can't get everybody at the top. But that's part of the thing you have to accept when you accept that there's a market. There are going to be failures. There are going to be people who are left behind in one way or another. And when you're talking about government policy, whether it's with education or anything else, that's going to happen, just like if you have a free market in goods. And government is not necessarily going to do a better job and prevent those bad things from happening. Often they're just going to spread the bad things more widely, and perhaps if you give some alternatives to people, you can lessen that. Now, if you think of if you go back, the title of my talk is The More the Merrier, right? So the more is the governments, and the merrier, I guess that's a alliteration, that's why that's in there. And local governments as Tibout competitors. So most of you are probably wondering how to pronounce that name. It's Tibout, like the football player. And I had to look that up myself because I've been saying it for years and never knew how to say it. This is probably the first time I actually had to say it out loud. So Tibout, like the football player. Now, if you know about anything about what economists say about private markets, my point and the point of this Tibout competition is that a lot of what you say about private goods and private markets have parallels with government. We often think of them as separate things, separate entities, but an awful lot of what makes markets work for private goods can also make markets work, whatever these markets are called, for publicly provided goods. And I had asked for a whiteboard, and this is what I got. So I'm going to put it up here. I'm sorry. Do you know who this is, Rachel?
Probably Goodall.
Goodall.
This is the Goodall parlor.
Okay.
It's gotta be Goodall. I don't know that it's going to fit though, because that mantle is.
I practiced.
It's all weird. Okay.
I didn't just make this up as I went along. Oh, wow.
We won't tell Mrs. Evans.
Which end do I write with?
Double-ended, you can go either way.
This is rights?
Yeah, you just take off the
Okay, I'm going to use one of these. Okay, now, oh, geez, that's even smaller when it's up there. All right, so I'm just going to list what we kind of think about when we have private goods being provided by private markets. And then government things that are parallel to that. Parallel, but not exactly the same. Because my point is that there are some elements of the things that make private markets work efficiently that are also present in government markets. Because, and this is also one of the reasons why fragmentation is good, because fragmentation, more governments, means you have more competition, more governments competing with each other for residents. Okay, so in private markets, we think that these things work pretty well because we have competition with entry and exit. And that entry and exit is relatively inexpensive in most cases. All right, so this competition works pretty well. And then the second thing that we say is pretty good about these markets is that consumers are mobile. And we don't mean that they can move around, but really what we mean is that they can vote with their dollars, right? Their money is mobile. If you don't like what one firm is giving you, then you take your money somewhere else. So you choose what goods are going to be produced, and you buy your votes, and you make these votes with your money. So you vote with dollars. Okay? So those are two key parts to this. And then another thing is that when you have these competitive firms and they're having to get your dollars, they have a lot of incentive to provide what you want. Okay, that might sound obvious, but it's not obvious to everyone. So what you get is you get a lot of variety of goods that are there to match people's preferences. So if you like a red car, they'll make red cars. If other people like blue cars, they'll make blue cars. Right? There's not decided what color car you have. So we have a lot of product differentiation. All right, and this product differentiation is meant to match the products that are being produced to the preferences of consumers. So the end result of a system like this, and there are many, many more aspects to it, but these are the important parts for what I'm going to talk about, is you have this competition. You can have entry and exit. New firms can enter. If they don't do a good job, they'll fail, and they close down, and someone replaces them. Consumers decide where to send their money, and that sends the signal to all of the firms that what they're producing is what they should be producing. And also, firms are competing for their market niche. They're trying to just carve out a market for themselves, and they do that by matching what consumers want. All right, now on the government side, you might think, well, government, the only thing we have is voting, right? All we can do is cast a ballot every year or every 2 years or whatever to throw the people out of office. And we can certainly try to do that if we don't like what's going on. But there's also things going on outside of the ballot box. All right, so there are some parallels to private markets here. But with the government, there is competition, but not much entry and exit. And they're not really after profits. Let's say that they're after residents. We'll just imagine that that's what they want. A sign of success is if people are choosing to move there, or if businesses are trying to move there. So they compete, but the really weak part of this is that the entry and exit is not that easy. This is really where the voting with actual ballot box voting comes into play. You can kind of throw out the managers, but the firm itself doesn't close down. All right? So that's where there's a bit of a difference. So, and it's a bit harder to throw out a bad manager of a government than to have just if you could just shut it down. Although you do get entry and exit, you do get some entities just shutting down or being shut down, going into receivership. Well, in California, you're going to get a lot of bankruptcies pretty soon of cities. But again, that's rare, and it's not really the way that you get the government to do what you want. But there's still some competition, because even if all they want is money, if they want tax revenue, and they're a bit more voracious than I'm assuming here, where they might be looking at the good of the residents, still in order to get money, they have to attract people and businesses. So maybe their incentives are lined up with, welfare maximization. All right, what about this second part, mobility? Well, there's certainly some mobility of people and businesses, because where you live is completely voluntary. You might face some constraints on your income and your personal life or your preferences or whatever, but there's nothing legally that stops you from living anywhere you can afford. It's not perfect mobility. It's not as easy as changing your brand of toothpaste, moving your house, but you can do it. So there is some mobility, and this is a check on governments. And so here you vote with your feet. All right, so instead of voting with your dollars, you vote with your feet. You just move somewhere else if your government isn't doing the job for you. All right, now this last part about product differentiation, well, this is really where the number of governments matters. If you have one government providing one type of service, like a government that is very high tax, high expense, and some people want that, and you don't want it, then if you don't have a place to move, then there's not a variety of things to choose from. So with many governments, then you get differentiation. I think he kicked it. All right, so many governments allows for differentiation. So if you look around St. Louis, places that have their own different character. and you choose to live in a place because it's where you want to live. It fits your characters, providing the services you want. Either the place is just where you want and the government is doing the sorts of things you want, providing parks or whatever. Some people don't want parks. They don't want to pay for that. Well, they live somewhere else, and so on. So it's not quite a perfect match, but there's a lot of mobility, and all the governments can provide something different and distinct for their residents. Okay, so we see that there are some parallels between how private markets work and how governments' markets work for the goods that are being provided by the government or the services that are being provided by the government. So this Tibout competition, where if you have a lot of local governments providing goods that should best be, or that can be provided locally, then the governments will compete with one another for residents, and this will mean that all of the governments can be better off, or most of them will be better acting governments than if you didn't have this competition. So for an economist, we look at everything in terms of competition and monopoly. Right? So here, it's if you have the bigger the government, the fewer competitors it has, then it's just going to act like monopoly. It doesn't have any pressure, market pressure to change. Right? With governments, the market pressure is that people and businesses will leave. Okay, so what this means is that if you can, what you should try to do is to find the lowest level of government possible to do the activities that you decided should be done by government. Now, it's also a good question, well, what are those activities? What activities should be done by government? And once you decide that, I'm again putting that aside, then it's a question of where you assign the different activities. And if you have the principle that you assign it to the lowest possible level possible, then that's where you spur this competition. Right? And there's a tendency in the last few years in the United States in the opposite direction. Lots of policies like education, health, things that used to be or traditionally were done by the states or at local levels are now being mandated at the federal level. All right, so these one size fits all. The one size fits all means we have no or less differentiation. Right? You're just one size shirt, and everyone has to wear that same shirt, no matter where you're from. Right? So this is where this Tibout competition comes into play, and it's where you can get local preferences and local desires and individuals aligning themselves with people who want similar things, being able to do that. Right? So in some equilibrium, when everyone can move around and you have the governments can match up with residents, you end up with pockets of people who want similar things, and they're having their government providing things that they want, or providing nothing if that's what they want. All right, so Tibout competition is the more the merrier. So that's why I say I'm in favor of governments, because you can have lots of governments. But think about which level of government you should have, and if you think about how things are actually aligned, you see an awful lot of what's going on and where governments are doing things are doing it pretty well, actually. They're at least assigning things to the appropriate level of government, even if you don't think they're doing it really well. Part of it is that government just has different incentives. But just think of different things that a government does, and then think about what level we might be able to put them. Okay, so national defense. Okay, you think, well, what's national defense for? National defense, why is this not privately provided? There's a notion of it being a public good because everyone can consume national defense, but you can't raise revenue. You can't make a profit on national defense. So you can't pay people who are or charge people who are consuming it, so you have to have the government doing it. And if you really want to get a strong national defense, then the bigger the better. So you put that at the national level. That's where that ends up. So if that's what you want is the best national defense, best meaning the strongest, then you put it at the highest level. You get economies of scale, and also you're extracting the public good nature of the good. Okay, what about police? Okay, most policing is very local, right? What you want police for is to be on the street, and when you call, someone shows up. But imagine if there was a national police force. There weren't your local police forces, there was just a national police force. So the FBI wasn't just there to investigate certain things, but there was someone in charge in Washington of setting up a police force that had to cover every street in the United States. Okay, does anybody see any problems with that? All right. Well, they wouldn't be very responsive to local concerns. They wouldn't really have a good idea. It's just too much to take in. They wouldn't have an idea of where they should be policing, what is going on at the street level, because all the decisions are made too far away. So that's something that should be pushed further and further down. So you have typically cities running their police force, right? So you have city-level police forces. But even then, cities maybe can't do everything that police should do. So, they need some specialist detectives. So there's a state police force that handles some things, and they provide things for the local police that the local police can't afford. So they have forensic labs, or at the state level for a lot of places, and smaller cities can use that forensics lab. So they split up kind of police production in different levels, and then you have the federal level also to deal with other things that are more federal. So the allocation of police, or the levels at which policing is done, makes a lot of sense, actually. Although I guess, now I'm not an Austrian economist, I don't know if any of you are. Some extreme Austrians would say that you shouldn't have any level of police. You should just, as a household, hire your own police. Is that right? You know these people. I don't. Or you have insurance?
We're Murphy.
Yeah.
Just a few people.
Okay. Now, you think of also roads and highways. Okay. Again, some economists would argue that you need private roads. Well, that's not terribly practical because you can't really extract revenue on all the local roads. You can do it on interstates, so maybe you can have it there. But that's also divided in different levels. You have even subdivisions in charge of some roads, then cities in charge of main roads, and then the county on top of that, then the state on top of that, and the federal on top of that. So you see how sometimes the government allocates these things efficiently, but there's a constant tension because each higher level of government always seems to want to extract it up. Right? They always want to do more than they maybe ought to. Now, in education, this is a constant battle also. And again, you can argue whether or not, you should argue whether or not the government should be in the business of providing education, being the firm that's providing the education, not whether they pay for it, but just whether they're the company providing it. Maybe you should have private firms doing it. But we've decided that we should have the government providing it. So what's the best way to do that? So again, I'll bring up the example. Imagine that we had one giant school district. So if St. Charles County, St. Louis County, and the city of St. Louis merged into one school district, would we all become Clayton and Ladue? No, we would all become Florissant. Right? Maybe a bit higher than the city of St. Louis, but not much. Right? Because often things are driven to the lowest denominator. Right? So good schools are driven out by the bad schools, and good government can be driven out by bad government. So at least if you have a lot of governments, you have a chance of some of them being good. Now, there's something even more mundane, which actually for an economist was fascinating, that happened in St. Louis County a few years ago, and that was garbage collection. And this is really a good example of the proper role of government and the proper levels of government to do things. In St. Louis County, although we have lots and lots of governments in St. Louis, there are some areas that are unincorporated. So it sounds it's like Wild West, but it's not quite like that. They're in St. Louis County, but they're not in a city. They're just unincorporated. So they don't have a city government. They deal directly with the county government. So in unincorporated St. Louis County, which is, I don't know, 40% of it or 30% of it, something like that. Does anybody know? Some surprisingly big amount. For garbage collection, you were in charge of that yourself as your household. You contacted a private collecting firm, and once a week, they would come and take your trash. And the house next to you might have a different company. And on the other side, there might even be a third company, who knows? And some of them would come twice a week, some of them would come just once a week. Maybe if you didn't want collection once a week, they would come every 2 weeks. Some of them you paid more and they would take more stuff. You didn't have to put it in cans. So you could pick which type of trash collection you wanted. And all of this was completely private, right? There was no government involvement at all. Well, so some people didn't care for this, and you could sort of see the reason for that is that garbage trucks create a lot of noise and a lot of traffic, and if there's anything rumbling down the street, it's usually a garbage truck. So this was annoying to a lot of people to have so many different garbage trucks going through their neighborhood. So there's some sort of an externality, so maybe you should do something about this. And maybe you should, but what they tried to do was exactly the opposite of what they should have done. What they decided was, okay, no more private trash collection at all. The county is going to choose one firm, and that firm is going to do trash collection for every non-incorporated household in the county. And then that was it. So you go from everyone choosing their own to the highest possible level of government, effectively the highest level that would be interested, doing this from above. And of course, everyone would have trash collection on the same once a week, and they'd have to have the licensed can that would have to be fit into that company's truck, all of this, so everything had to be homogenized. That was the plan, and they thought this is great because they planned it all out. It was planned after all, and it's planned. So if it's planned, it must be better than unplanned, right? And it was just going to be, a huge mess. So a lot of people, and I know one of my colleagues was in the Libertarian Party in Missouri, so I guess it's ironic, he organized people to to oppose this. And they had to fight, people had to fight, and they allowed, what the county finally gave in on was, well, maybe we can allow some places, if they get 3/4 of the residents of a subdivision or something, they can opt out, but they have to choose their own company. And we're going to give them a list of 3, I think is what it was, something like that. And that's the way it was. It's that now you have pockets of places that were able to organize themselves, and they now can choose in a smaller collective which garbage company to have. So maybe for them it's better. But lots of people, the people who were able to organize and do all of this were, of course, the people who could afford to do it, who had lawyers or were lawyers. And the majority of people who were, all they had was their market power. They could vote with their dollars, at least and they didn't have the dollars to vote for politicians. They could only vote for garbage trucks. Then, they lost their power altogether. So now they have no control at all over what to do with their garbage collection, because garbage collection is just one of the many things that the county does, and they can't, unless you really, really care a lot about your garbage collection, that's not going to be the one thing that tips your vote for or against anyone else. So it just goes into the collective thing that the county government does, and there's nothing you can do about it once it's devoid from you. But at the lower level, at least if it's at the subdivision, your subdivision, you might have some ability to influence things. And actually in my own neighborhood, we recently switched our garbage collection. I live in Baldwin, so the city does the garbage collection, which wasn't too bad. I wasn't too bothered by that, despite my leanings. It worked fine. And I used to, I had the advantage of moving from University City to Baldwin. So University City, if you've not been there, the People's Republic of University City. So everything was prescribed. You had, your trash can had to be set exactly right, or else, you know, it wouldn't get picked up, and they'd leave nasty notes and all sorts of things. And you, heaven forbid, couldn't leave anything outside the trash can. If they did that, they'd add extra stuff. So in Baldwin, I moved there, and it was you just throw any stuff out in your driveway, throw old television sets, any sorts of stuff out there, and then the next morning it's gone. I don't know who takes it. I don't care who takes it. It's gone. Well, some of it is people driving around in pickup trucks and picking through the garbage, and that was banned when I was in university. They didn't allow that. That was private enterprise. We had to stomp that out. That's our job, is to not pick up the stuff you're leaving out. So I was quite happy. So I thought, oh, this is great. I can just put anything out there and they'll take it. Well, but now there's a cost-saving measure, and we have to fit it all into one can. And luckily they gave us 2 cans, one for recycling. So it's really like having 2 completely big trash cans, which is great. Apparently there are rules of what you're supposed to put in the recycling can. What are they? There's someone on the Sustainability Coalition. You can help me out with this. But it turns out whatever you put in the recycling can, that's gone also. You'll be happy to hear it. It's gone the next day. I don't know where it goes. It's not my concern.
And you're fine if you don't get it right.
Well, actually, just on the side, I lived in Tokyo for a little while, and there, recycling it's manic. Well, if you know any Japanese people, you'll understand that it's crazy. And they're just insane about the precision of their recycling. So you'll have 4 or 5 different colored trash bags, but they're tinted different colors. They are see-through. Because if you put something in the wrong bag, as they're picking up your trash can, their bag, you're looking at it, and they're looking very closely at what's in there. And if there's something in the bag that should be in a different bag, then you leave it. They leave it. And I was living in a place, it was the Bank of Japan, so I was there. And my wife was Japanese, so she could read and we understood what was going on, but there was a Spanish couple that was working at the Bank of Japan also, and they lived above us, and they couldn't read the instructions. It was all in Japanese, and they didn't know any Japanese. So they never were able to figure out how to assign the garbage to the bags. In about 2 months, they were still getting it wrong, and their garbage just kept piling it up. And they'd leave it out and say, I'm positive this is it, I'm positive, and then it would still be there next morning. So I don't know if they actually did this. I left before they did. But they decided, you know, the Bank of Japan pays for shipping back and forth, so we should just ship our garbage back to Spain because we know what to do with it there. So how did I get on that? Oh, so... Okay, so garbage collection, now I have to do it very precisely. And my neighborhood is, I know some of my neighbors at least, we preferred to just put all our crap out there and then have it disappear in the morning instead of having to fit it into the little cans and so on. And more than that, we're willing to pay more for it. I realize that it's more expensive, and we're willing to pay. I'm willing to pay more. I'll pay 20% more if I can just put any crap out there and it'll disappear. But I'm not allowed to pay 20% more because it's been delegated too high. And my subdivision can't decide to pay more, even though we all have the same houses and the same number of kids and the same car or SUV. But we can't, even though we would all agree to pay more, we're not allowed because that product differentiation is prevented, right? That's illegal. If we even tried to contract someone to come in and take the extra crap, that would be illegal because that's banned. So because the garbage collection wasn't pushed down at a low enough level to match the preferences. So if we just had more government or more governments, then I'd be a lot happier putting the trash out every day or every week. And that's really what it's all about. Yeah, I don't really ask for much. Is it much? Is it too much? Okay, so the point of all of this is that the existence of competition for residents or whatever it is you think governments might be competing for means that there's pressure, there's market pressure for governments to do a good job. They don't always do a good job. And just like firms don't always do a good job. And the big difference is that firms don't exit, or firms can exit, but governments don't. And cities don't exit, they just fail, but they're still there. So that is a complication that doesn't make this model of how the world works perfect. But you do see that there are these elements of competition that can help government to be better, and also, more importantly, helps localities do what they want and to lead the life that they want, because they get the government, whatever you want the government to do or not do, they get that to match their own preferences, what they're interested in. And if they can get together and do that or not have the government do it, then great. But a lot of that is prevented because there's this creep, this mission creep, where everything is going to higher and higher levels, where things used to be done at the household level, neighborhood level, everything seems to be up at least one notch. And from the federal to the UN, I don't know if that scares anyone. Throw it out there. So if we had more things being pushed down, it's not only efficient sometimes in terms of the, like just the doing it low cost, but it's a better match to preferences, is how an economist would put it. But it better allows individuals and households to live the life that they want to lead instead of what someone else thinks they ought to be leading. Okay, and as I said, some places are going to fail, and primarily they fail because they're being poorly governed. And most of these are very big cities: Detroit, the city of St. Louis to some extent, city of Cleveland, city of Buffalo. But you'll notice that places outside of those cities are thriving. Right? So it's the big old city that's collapsing, usually because the government is doing a very bad job of it, and often, if you at least carved it up, maybe parts of it would survive. And I certainly see that with the city of St. Louis. Now it's all, well, the current mayor's better, but some of it would be doing pretty well if they could govern themselves a bit. Okay, so that's all I have.